I think we're at critical mass, and keep in mind as you're listening, folks, we might have just a 12 to 15-second delay. So if you comment something, we'll see that just a little bit later. All right, let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Start with Slide Zero Lunch and Learn. I'm Molly Gagan, one of the narrative strategists over at GhostRanch Communications. We are going to be led today by product marketing leader Steve Earl. I don't know if he's near your Zoom square above. I'm pointing and taking us through the Slide Zero presentation planning framework. And also Steve Sheets, our technical director over at GhostRanch, presentation specialist and PowerPoint wizard overall. And he will be showing some specific slide examples where Slide Zero can be really seen in action in the second half of the presentation today. So that's kind of how it's going to go down today. This Lunch and Learn is brought to you by GhostRanch Communications. And if you aren't familiar, we are a specialized agency helping B2B product marketers elevate their mission-critical presentations, one story, one slide at a time. We work collaboratively with clients to help bring their ideas to life with an integrated approach to design and storytelling. And what's funny about today's Lunch and Learn is that as presentation specialists, it's rare that we're on this side of the camera, you know? Typically, we're the ones over here behind the scenes working to help business leaders look amazing up on stage with their keynotes, their breakouts, webinars, or everyday sales decks down to the last detail. So as business design and storytelling nerds, one of the coolest perks about working as presentation designers is this kind of front row access. We get into seeing how some of the brightest minds in business approach their presentation planning. Or as Hamilton might put it, presentation designers get to be in the room where it happens. Over the years, working on countless presentations, we've noticed that the best of the best really have one thing in common, and that is preparation. They have an understanding that presentations don't just happen. They take hours and hours of planning and practice. So in 2013, this is something Nike apparently didn't take seriously, and you might be familiar with this story. They had the chance to pitch Steph Curry on a re-up of his endorsement deal. And as presentation legend has it, the PowerPoint itself was littered with remnants of Kevin Durant's endorsement deck from a previous pitch. And Steph and his team were less than impressed with the lack of personalization. They said that they basically stopped listening, like once they saw that, and would later on go sign a deal with Under Armour, which people say is around a $14 billion value now. So yeah, presentation preparation is a big deal. And because we take it so seriously, we've got no one but our favorite Steves to lead the way today. Steve Earl, to give you a bit of an intro, is an amazing marketing leader with a 30+ year in the tech industry, leading product marketing teams, developing go-to-market strategies. He has held product marketing leadership positions at companies like Oracle, WebTrends, and PeopleSoft. Most recently, as the VP of product marketing at Oracle, he led teams responsible for Oracle Marketing Cloud and their entire Oracle customer experience application business. So as a product marketing leader, Steve believes in the value of storytelling to engage B2B audiences. And having worked with Steve for the last few months, I know he's a strong proponent of frameworks. So no one better to lead you today. He really works to make the complex sound simple and work collaboratively across product marketing and sales team to ensure alignment. So you will be getting the recording if you press attend today on the LinkedIn. I think I have your email. So not only will it exist kind of as a post on the GhostRanch LinkedIn, but I will send you a recording of it as well. We definitely want to make some time for comments and questions at the end. So please just leave those in the comments on the post as we go along, and we'll make sure that we get to them. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Steve Earl.
Wonderful. Thank you, Molly, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar on strategic presentation planning. I'm thrilled to be speaking on the subject today and looking forward to getting into it. So product marketing is an extremely strategic role, but when it comes to creating presentations, we don't always take a strategic approach, and often that's for many different reasons, which we'll get into here in a minute. My philosophy on creating presentations is similar to how I approach running, hence a little caricature there on the title slide. You know, the hardest part for running a distance race happens before you get to the start line. I've got so much respect for distance athletes like Eliud Kipchoge, who until recently was the world record holder in the marathon. He, like all elite marathoners, methodically prepare for a marathon running anywhere from 100 to 150 miles a week. And without a very structured and disciplined preparation, which, those that know Kipchoge's story knows he's very disciplined, they would fail when they got to the start line. So today's webinar discusses a strategic approach to planning a presentation. It isn't about presenting a presentation, it's about planning a presentation, which a lot of the product marketers on the call here today are probably very familiar with that ask. So we're going to outline some of the critical work that's required before you write that very first slide. All right, so it's probably an understatement that as product marketers, we actually spend a lot of time building and delivering presentations. Some go well, others do not. And there's many, many reasons and influences, reasons that influence a bad outcome. So before we get started today, I wanted to do a quick poll to get all your thoughts on your reasons that things might go wrong in a presentation. So this first poll is about what's the most common challenges that you encounter when planning a presentation. There's a QR code right there. Get your cell phone, take a picture of the QR code, and it'll bring up the poll on your phone, and you can just simply pick the response to the seven responses there that you'll see on the screen. So go ahead and do that. It may be, again, planning presentation. It may be that there's just a lack of strategic direction. It's often we're given an ask to build a deck by Monday, and there really is no background. So is it a lack of strategy? Perhaps requirements are confusing or different or inconsistent across your stakeholders? Maybe just knowing where to start. Where do I start? What's the process? Perhaps it's the creative end. Once I've got my story, I either don't have the creative resources to bring it to life, or what I do have just isn't quite working. Meeting unrealistic deadlines. Boy, I think that's a hard one to get around, but often that's a big challenge. And the scope as well. So definitely near that last 10% of getting your presentation ready, there's always last minute changes in requests. So maybe it's scope. And then there's a seventh option there, which is other. If you have something else we haven't listed here, which I'm sure there are, click on that and type in your response. So how are we doing for responses, Steve? Should we take a look? Okay, yeah. Strategy, lack of strategic direction, ahead by a long way. Keep putting them in there. This should dynamically change. Yeah, different stakeholders. That's always a challenge, trying to satisfy everyone. And at the end of the day, you don't really satisfy anyone. The creative is also a challenge, right? How do you make the story just come to life? So all makes sense. Very good. Is there any others there?
I don't see any others. So we had a pretty comprehensive list, I guess.
Yeah, we picked the right 6. Okay, so that's interesting. We'll publish some of this probably in a blog afterwards, so you can kind of get a sense of the responses from the group here, but not too surprising. Terrific.
All right.
Okay, so given all that, there's just so many, as you all know, there's so many reasons, and not everyone is solvable, but what we'll talk about today will give you a few more tools to help minimize the impact of all those things that that we just talked about. So the first half of the webcast will outline a framework for presentation planning I call Slide 0, and it'll then dive into some tools that were developed with GhostRanch to bring Slide 0 to life in the form of Pitch Planner. It's a set of tools we'll walk through. Then the second half, we'll discuss best practices in presentation planning with Steve Sheets on the line, being the expert in designing these presentations, and how planning impacts or influences what the final product's going to look like. Steve's going to give us some great examples there. He definitely knows the value of good planning. So let's get into it. Slide 0. We're all product marketers. We all love a good framework, particularly myself. And I call this framework Slide 0 because it defines the questions that must be answered prior to writing the first slide of your deck. It's a simple framework that's valuable in a few different scenarios. The first one is is when you're asked to build a deck for somebody else, right? This is probably, as product marketers, most of the time, this provides a way of interviewing or kicking off the project with the person who requested the deck. So it's a fairly structured approach that'll force the stakeholder, the person you're writing the deck for, to really think about what they're asking for from you. So it's a great interviewing tool, if you like, when you're asked to build a deck for someone else. If you're building a deck for yourself, right, you're building it and you're presenting it, you may not want a formal process to go through, but it's still important to think through each of the questions in the framework, because even though it's for you, having that information determined up front will actually help you think through that presentation and what it's going to be about. The third scenario is if you're outsourcing the development of the presentation to either your internal agency with sort of internal design team within your company, or an external agency like GhostRanch. Right? They're going to take the direction from you. They're going to go off and build a deck. So this framework provides a nice structured way to communicate those requirements to them. Right? It's a nice way to package it up. And remember, because the design teams speak a different language to product marketers, so it's crucial to provide them with the information they need in a way that they can consume and act upon. So it's a great way to collect and organize that information for that purpose. And then finally, if you're a product marketing team leader, you have product marketers in your team, I've certainly found it's a nice way to give consistent feedback to my team through the review process, right? You probably sit through lots of reviews from your team of the deck they're building. And it's a great way to provide structured feedback in a way that's fairly actionable for your team. So all of these scenarios, in all these scenarios, the Slide Zero framework represents the questions that need to be answered if the ultimate presentation you're building is going to hit the mark. So it's a pretty strategic approach. So the framework itself is fairly simple. It's broken into 4 areas: who, why, what, and how. And by bringing clarity to each of these 4 areas up front, many of the missteps or redos that typically happen downstream in presentation design can be avoided. So let's dive into each of these 4 areas. We'll start with the who. So the who is all about, obviously, your audience. The first rule of marketing, you've got to know your audience, and being as specific as you can, from a role, a title, an industry, what they care about, all those things that as marketers we do second nature. The objective here is to shift the presentation from being product-centric to audience-centric. However, it's not just enough to know the audience piece, the titles and the people that are going to be listening to you, but the context is really important. It captures where the presentation will be delivered. Is it a big screen executive keynote, an intimate conference room setting, a technical workshop, or a Zoom call that's being streamed through LinkedIn that we're doing right now? So this will impact the visual content, the slide detail, the granularity, all those things that are important downstream to designers like Steve. The stage also is important. Often we're probably most of us on the line are in the B2B, business to business product marketing roles, and the B2B buying process is different no matter what company you're at. But the reality is, as you're building presentations, knowing what stage of the buying process you're at is really important, because that influences the depth of the content and the different tactics and messaging, slightly different depending on whether it's an early stage sales deck, or if it's a late stage, perhaps it's a solution definition or even a case study, somewhere in that spectrum. So the stage is important, and the style finally is really important. Understanding the presenter that you're building the presentation for is really important to capture. They have different strengths. They may like builds, they may like simple slides, complex slides, data built into the slide. There's so many items that the presenter may be wanting that's unique to them. So understanding the style of the presenter. So this presentation we're doing today was initially built for a workshop at a go-to-market GDM 23 conference in San Diego that I did with Steve back in, I think it was August. So we've taken that was an in-room workshop, it was an interactive workshop, and So we've adapted this, we've had to adapt this slide because the context changed, because now we're doing it on Zoom, streaming through LinkedIn. So a very different change to sort of the context. So that's an example where we've had to adjust the presentation for that purpose. So that's the who. Moving on to the why. So once the who is clear, it's important to clarify the objective of the presentation, the why. So knowing what success looks like and starting with that outcome in mind will increase the likelihood that your presentation will achieve its goals. And actually, defining the outcomes probably one of the hardest parts of a presentation. Why am I doing this? What am I trying to achieve? And it all starts with that definition of success and what success looks like. And it could be you're trying to get some additional media coverage. You're trying to increase your ranking in an analyst report. It could be to close a deal, perhaps, for one of your sellers, but understanding the outcome is really important. And then with that outcome in mind, what's the change in the audience's thinking you're trying to create? What did they think before they listened to your presentation? And how do you want them to think after listening to your presentation? For example, they may be under the impression that you've stopped investing in your product line. The product line they use, they may have heard that you have stopped investing and they're concerned. So you want to take them through a journey and change their thinking in a way that they're now believing that you're continuing to innovate, the product is getting the investment it needs, and it's reassuring them that, okay, they're more comfortable now. So understanding how you want the audience thinking to change is important. And then finally, the call to action. I think this is pretty obvious. Every presentation should have one. It's a great way to keep engaged with your audience beyond the single event. And these actions typically aligned, obviously, to the outcome you've defined, but they're a little more tactical and specific. And obviously, they're usually presented at the end of your presentation. So again, kind of obvious, but be really clear about what those calls to action are. So that's the who. Let's move on to the what. Okay, so the what describes the subject of your presentation. This will typically be a product or a service that you're presenting on. Maybe it's a report you produced as well. So it isn't always product related, but understanding very clearly the what piece. And there's 4 things that are important to get really crisp here. What it is, what it does, the value it delivers, and why it's unique when compared to the competition. Again, as product marketers, we kind of live and breathe this every day. But the challenge here is to answer these questions, maybe a sentence or two, and simplicity is key, but it's often the hardest part. So I often do the test, imagining myself at a dinner party with some friends. I've asked, hey, Steve, what does your product do? And so pretending you're explaining back to your friends who aren't in your industry what it does in plain English words, not buzzwords, is a really good test. And to be honest with you, I feel the product marketers that use buzzwords really don't know the what. They really don't understand really what their product is doing. So they're starting to use buzzwords to fill in probably the lack of knowledge that they have. And then they start to sound like all the competitors, right? Starting to use buzzwords. So take the time here. There is real power in simplicity. And as you're trying to communicate it through a PowerPoint presentation, it's really important to really think through this up front. The 4th element is how. And Seth Godin said that marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but about the stories you tell. Marketing is all about storytelling. So this is the most fun part of the framework. It's the how element. It captures the ingredients that your design team will use to create a great story. So think of these ingredients as the building blocks for your presentation. And it's a necessary input into that next step, which is the storyboarding process. So first is the hook. It's the opening idea that captures the audience's attention and gives them a reason to keep listening. It can take the form of a quote, a question, a statistic, a trend, a new business model, an idea that perhaps the customer hadn't thought of yet, but it's a way to get their attention, and it actually becomes the basis of the why change message within your presentation. Now, the second piece of urgency is often overlooked. I think we often see we have a great why change, but not a very good, well, why should I change now? What's the What's the reason to take an action now? So this urgency will help establish the why now part of your story, and really think through that as you're planning for your presentation. Next, consider the problems the audience may face that are potential roadblocks to change. So the story that your presentation will tell will revolve around how you and your company and your product help your customer overcome those roadblocks in order to make that successful change that you talked about earlier. So these roadblocks are really important because it will become the central theme of how you can solve them for your customer in a way that no one else can. A unique point of view, probably a really important conversation and a really important piece of the framework, is having a unique point of view about how you solve their problems. It's key to creating your story. It's your uniqueness, and it should explain how you look at the customer's problems differently and why your approach is best when compared to the competition. So a well-crafted point of view will form the spine of your why, of the why you part of the story. It's really, really important. And so many times we don't think enough about what's our unique point of view and how do we stand out from the competition. And then finally, there's nothing more important than demonstrated proof. We all know that as marketers, but it's really important often, because it does build confidence and makes your story real. So having proof points has to be in your story, and that's what really brings it home. So as that's the 4 parts of the framework, and as product marketers, the individual pieces of this framework very familiar to you all. However, it's common to miss some of them when you get on a tight deadline. Whether you use this framework formally or informally, depending on the scenario, it's essential to consider the questions each part of the framework raises. You could use it as a guide to guide a simple 1-hour planning session, or with your stakeholders or your managers, or you could follow a formal process to capture those requirements to deliver to an outside agency. It's up to you how you use the framework, but regardless of how it's used, the questions that it raises have just got to be answered or considered as a team, with your manager or with your stakeholders. It really helps give you the confidence that your presentation is heading in the right direction. So as a product marketer, it's really good to have this process up front so that you can feel pretty good about, okay, I know where we're heading and I know what the outcome needs to be. Now, as I said earlier, as a product marketing leader, I've found it provides a great way to give feedback to the team and ensure that they've considered, my team has considered all the areas. And to be honest with you, I've had reviews or presentations from different team members that I haven't got beyond the question, who's the audience and what are we trying to achieve? And that happens even before we start looking at the slides. So it's a really good framework to get started with, and make sure that your session and your presentation, your building's on the right track. Okay, so let's move on. That's the theory, or the framework. And I've been working with GhostRanch now for a while on putting the Slide Zero framework into action. As a presentation design agency, GhostRanch works every day with product marketers like yourselves and knows firsthand what information is most important to build presentations that are really going to hit the mark. So together we've developed a set of planning tools called Pitch Planner, which have a few different pieces to it. So I want to go through those right now. The first is the Pitch Planner workbook. This is all these tools, by the way, are available on the GhostRanch website. There's a QR code on each of these slides. You can scan it and go straight to the web page and download the pieces that are most relevant. But the first one here is a simple workbook. It captures the answers to all those questions I just talked through in the Slide Zero framework. For those that like getting away from their computer to do some thinking, which I do, I often go to a coffee shop and sit down, getting away from my desk, or even on a plane, I do a lot of thinking and planning, and having this workbook and just jotting down the ideas is really, really helpful. You can see Mikey there On the top right, he's obviously using the Pitch Planner workbook, driving to work in the morning. And Mikey, that's not a great idea. We don't want you to do that, but I'm glad you're getting some use out of the workbook. So the workbook itself, you'll see the first half has detailed worksheets for the who, why, what, and how. Write down the answers to the questions that are in there. If you have some additional questions that you feel should be part of the framework but aren't, you can add those, because a framework's meant as a starting point, and there's probably some things in there that I didn't capture and are important to your business. So you can add those in. And so the first half is all about thinking through and capturing all the answers to those important questions. The second half of the workbook is a place to bring all that information together in a summary format that can be used later in the review process. Think about it as an at-a-glance view. And then near the back of the workbook are a few pages where you can start the storyboarding process. Right now that I've got all these pieces, let's start sketching out a few of the slides that my design team can pick it up and run with it. But I want to dig into one of those pieces first, is this at-a-glance view, because I find it's particularly useful. The at-a-glance view format presents the answers to all those questions that you've jotted down in a way that'll be pretty useful in stakeholder reviews. So the second tool, therefore, on the web page is a simple PowerPoint template. It's a single slide you can download from the Pitch Planner webpage there with the QR code, and it matches the format of that summary page in the workbook. And so by transferring all those answers into this one page, you have a pretty nice summary of the valuable information that you've captured, and it's really useful in presentation reviews. This is slide 0. This comes before slide 1 of your presentation, and it's a great tool to have at the beginning. So as you're reviewing a presentation with your manager or your stakeholder, that's the first one you go through. So you'd start with, hey, before I get into the deck I want to review with you today, let's just take a quick look at some of the assumptions I've made. And it's pretty simple. So it's a single slide, and you can validate those assumptions with the stakeholder up front, because it makes it very explicit why you built this presentation the way you did. It'll quickly identify areas of misalignment with your stakeholders and some of the disconnects. Perhaps the outcome that you thought you were trying to achieve is different to what your stakeholder wanted. Perhaps you haven't captured the essence of the what piece well enough, and you'll get some feedback there. And I think that this really positions product marketing as taking a strategic and thoughtful approach to presentation creation as well. If you keep using this and establishing the big picture questions up front, you'll start to be seen even more so as a very strategic, taking a very strategic approach to planning presentations. And again, product marketing leader, a great framework for you to give feedback to your team. And I leave it there as slide 0 all through the review process. It's a really important tool. So that one slide, download it, include it in your presentation. It's a pretty useful tool. Okay, and then the final tool that's out there on the web page is just a simple cheat sheet or a reference guide that can be downloaded, pinned to your wall, to your cubicle, to your home office. And it's a great way just to have a reference sheet about all those questions that are part of the framework. So if you use nothing else and you just want a reminder about, what are the key elements I need, this is a great one-pager that's been laid out very nicely by the GhostRanch team that you can download and either even send out to your teams. Say, hey, this is a great way to think about planning for a presentation. Keep it close and refer to it when needed. So that's the third piece. So 3 tools out there. The workbook itself, multi-page workbook that's available for download. I think Molly later will tell you how you can get one in the mail. We'll send out some books itself. Molly will tell us how to do that later. The executive summary template, the PowerPoint template, that's a really good one-slide summary that you should use in every review. And then the cheat sheet that's available for download, just a simple reminder for your teams. And again, all these are available on the GhostRanch Pitch Planner page. So with that in mind, I want to bring on Steve Sheets. As Molly said earlier, Steve's an expert presentation designer, visual storyteller. He works with product marketing teams every single day, designing and building presentations. So thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Thank you.
So just one quick question before you get into your, as a professional presentation designer, let's start with why all this prep matters to you and really how much of it does matter. And maybe you could give a quick response to that, and then I'll let you go on your slides.
Yeah, man, I could talk all day about how each one of these matters, but I guess from, the 1,000-foot view, it really does all matter. The information from slide 0 is extremely important to us. It's very similar to what we'd be looking for in a good creative brief. If we can't get this kind of information, we're just going to struggle. It's kind of a fact of life. And at some point, if we are struggling like that, we're going to have to go after what seems safe and sort of does the job. And that just does it work? Sure, but it also leads to more mediocre work. With the slide 0 information and all these high-level questions answered, it gives us everything we need to know, so we know where to focus our curiosity, and then we can really push boundaries and get to actually level up the work and take something from okay to great or even better. So with that in mind, we wanted to do another poll here. I wanted to see what people struggle with the most when creating presentations, whether that has to do with writing or design. There's all sorts of answers here. And this is a safe space. If design and writing were easy, it wouldn't be a career. So, it's okay that this stuff is hard. We totally get it. And I don't want to dive in too much to these in detail individually. We'll just let people answer. It looks like they're starting to come in. So let's see what folks are having trouble with. Crafting a compelling and engaging story, definitely a challenge. Totally get that.
Might just need 15-20 seconds on here as people get to the perfect. Here it goes.
Yeah, they're starting to come in more here. Looks like we're up to 4 responses so far. 100% crafting a compelling and engaging story. Imagery and integrating visuals that keep the presentation engaging. It's definitely tough, and even where to source photography can be hard sometimes. I guess for what it's worth, crafting the story, that is something that we are absolutely willing to help people with. So keep us in mind if that's where you find yourself having some trouble. And then looks like content and focus and ensuring that the core message comes through in a clear and concise way is something that people have trouble with too. I can say one thing I'm thinking about as I'm designing slides is, what do I want people to see first, second, and third on every slide? And then as a presentation as a whole, you got to keep that, what's the goal of the presentation in mind? I think that's from the why portion of slide 0. But yeah, this stuff's hard, and that's okay. But slide 0 does make it easier. Please keep those questions coming in. Like Steve said, we're going to use these to do some maybe blog posts and things like that later. So maybe you'll get some useful responses to your particular struggle. If you'll keep sharing those with us here, but I'll keep moving for now and talk a little bit about with some examples about sort of what this slide 0 stuff enables us to do. First example I've got up here is made for a company called NextKey. They make keyless entry systems, and they needed a deck that they could show to investors. And we knew the audience for this would need things to not just move quickly and get to the point, but it was also going to have to look really good, help loosen their wallets, and be financially enticing to really, get them hooked and want to jump on it. So with the sort of information we were able to get from slide 0, we were able to draw, we decided to draw a comparison to a familiar brand. We used Peloton, and we were able to tout this huge growth opportunity, and even added a sense of urgency to the slide with that first mover advantage text that we put there in the top left. And help get them interested. So this was really about who are we showing it to.
Hey Steve, a quick question before you move on. And it's not related to this, but generally, this is because the majority of our presentations these days, and particularly since 2020, obviously, are over Zoom and in a virtual meeting room. How do you, any guidance on how you tailor presentations for these different platforms, or it be in person versus, over a virtual platform?
Oh yeah, totally different approach. Zoom's the best thing to happen to presentation design. All of a sudden, instead of having to worry about people in the back where everything needs to be really big, or maybe there's heads that could be blocking the entire lower third of the screen. All these challenges that we have and have to keep in mind with sort of these larger in-person presentations, or something that could be in a boardroom. With Zoom, we know everybody has a front row seat, and we're able to get a lot more on the slides while also doing it in a more elegant way. Small text just tends to look better. So it's really cool that we're able to take advantage of that. And it's probably a huge part of why presentation designs become so much more of a focus. Like, we're just able to do things better than what we could before. So presentation design is really catching up to really where print design is, and that's always kind of what's at the forefront of what's cool. So it's really neat to see that gap closing. We're really excited about it. Then this slide for Vivo needed to convince their audiences that not only are they a music video streaming platform, but they're actually the market leader in the space. So, we have stats that say that and a slide that shows it. Picture works perfectly with the layout, and the whole thing is pretty wild looking and super on brand. So this slide looks like what we needed it to do, and when form follows function, you're nailing it. So I just love this slide, and we really needed to know all that slide zero stuff to be able to get to a solution like this.
Yeah, this is a great example where I think the change in audience thinking, I think moving into this, before seeing this presentation, I don't think the audience realized Vivo was a leader in this category, right? The fast, TV category. And I think this slide sort of helps to change that thinking a little bit, from really using the data there on the right to show that actually Vivo is the leader in this space. And so I think I can see how some of that change in thinking was behind building this slide, but I do want to ask you about the purple color, because you haven't mentioned it yet. And I know you didn't really like the purple color, but on this idea of topography and color palettes, which I'm terrible at, how do you go about designing decks, with those things in mind? Does it make a difference? Any thoughts that could help us on that one?
As wild as this thing looks, I guess my joke is, if you want people to really be convinced of something, you can't just show them, you also have to make them feel it. So we had to get pretty crazy in this one to get them to feel it. And while it looks like this pretty wild, colorful slide, less is more, I guess, would be my suggestion when you're trying to make things look good. This is really two colors. It's shades of red and it's purple. And there's only one font. So, as in your face and Miley Cyrus music video, like as this is, there's also not much here. I mean, it's not just one font, it's one font all in the same weight. Looks like, I don't know, Avenir Medium, I think. So really dialing things back and keeping things simple can have a lot more impact than what people probably give it credit for. And then this slide we did for MindTickle. MindTickle is essentially sales coaching at scale. It helps to get all your sales and marketing in line. And as many of you guys out there can probably imagine, that is a whole lot to wrangle. So we needed to say it and show it in a way that was simple. And that's not a small task, but with the clarity that Slide Zero provides, the writers and designers were a lot more equipped for the task. And we were able to mine this gem out of all the noise, and we're very pleased with where it's landed and the simplicity that got us here.
Yeah, and probably a good example of representing the what, being really clear about this presentation that you put together. So what are we talking about? And I think this simplifies it right down. You talked about the rule of 5 a few times in the past when it comes to presenting the what, but I think anything on a slide. Do you want to talk about what you meant by the rule of five and how that plays out in design?
Sure. So if I had 5 things on a slide, especially if they're all the same shape, that's an easy thing to imagine. Say I have like 5 circles on a slide. The average person could look at it and just know instantly that there's 5 things on there. It's just kind of how our brain works. It's a number, like 5 or less, we can deal with very easily. If you start putting more than 5 on a slide, more people are going to have trouble instantly recognizing that number of objects. And then instead of kind of diving in and just, going straight to the title or whatever you want them to read first, their brain's going to start to do something else instead, where it's going to see the slide and go, whoa, that's a lot of stuff. And then they try to figure out where to go and what to read or what to listen to, or even what you're talking about. And by having less elements on a slide, ideally 5 or less, you're way more likely to remove that barrier for entry, and people just kind of go into it and get the information. And then, fun segue, a slide with probably a lot more than 5 things on it, but it's okay because it's part of a journey. So a lot of this stuff is kind of pre-established. This slide is part of a journey where the audience is learning about how and why something works. And you can kind of see their process through the journey along the top there. We've kind of got these breadcrumbs to help lead them along. We started with photosynthesis, and now we're talking about, the ocean, and we're educating the audience on this stuff so that we can establish some baseline understandings. Then we're also using these big juicy stats to establish some trust. And then also we're really baiting the hook. Like, these are pretty interesting facts. And the photography is working really well with this too. It feels like it's just part of the brand and part of the whole thing. And it's creating this beautiful scene. And I think that really helps establish the trust as well, which is probably really important, because if you keep reading down the path of where we're headed, it's genetic engineering and microalgae, which it sounds like it could be pretty terrifying if it wasn't presented well. So we had to be really careful with this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really quickly, I think one of the challenges in the early poll was representing data on slides. I think that was one of the responses that fared well in the early poll. Mm-hmm. Really quickly, data on a slide. Any good methods or techniques that you've used to represent what could be complex data in a simple way?
Yeah. If you're going to show a graph, even if it's a relatively simple one, like even if the shape of the graph kind of tells the story, reinforce that shape with an arrow, and have a big statement that tells the audience what you want them to think about what you're showing them. Like, don't just show them, but also kind of like spell it out, help them know what understanding they're supposed to get from it. And you'll be able to move the story along and get the result you need from them a lot easier and faster. And if you can just show a stat and remove the graph, go ahead and do it. Or if there's more than one thing you need to show, I probably wouldn't have more than 2, maybe 3 graphs if they're really simple on one slide. So less is more is going to be my theme for the day, pretty much. And then, my kind of top 3 takeaways from this. Better, faster, cheaper, pick 2 is a joke that I've heard a few times in the design industry. It's probably true for any service industry. But what's kind of neat here, since we're talking about frameworks and best practices, instead of these being opposing forces, with slide 0, or the kind of information it provides, instead of these working against each other, it's more like a flywheel. They all kind of feed each other. The presentation designers and writers are able to stay really engaged and excited about it. They're going to do better work. They're going to do it faster. That's going to make it cheaper, and it's going to loop back around. And with all the time we save, we're going to get time to look for those perfect photos, and maybe try some things designing that we wouldn't have had time to try otherwise, because we're not sure if it's going to work. But those are the things that get us to really cool results. Stakeholder buy-in. We're going to know everybody's on board. We're going to know what they want to get out of it, and we're going to be able to run with it. And then we've got this single source of truth, where even if some stakeholders maybe aren't agreeing in a meeting, we still have this slide 0, where at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to take the meeting notes and update slide 0 maybe. And then we know who to listen to. We don't have to wait for I've joked before, it's like, Mom, Dad, stop fighting. Like, you get the stakeholders to sort it all out, and then we listen to slide 0 at the end of the day. So super, super handy. And yeah, keep your designers excited. We're gonna love having this. We're gonna love you guys for providing it to us, and we're gonna get the work done well for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Good stuff. Finishing out here a little bit, the slide 0 framework and the pitch planner tools are based on the premise that the most important work happens before you write slide 1. And Steve, I don't mean that as a diss on the designers, because you are very important, but from a product marketing perspective, before you even get to slide 1, the heavy work happens. And that's, the framework itself and the tools help answer the critical questions that are needed, but also gain alignment on the answers from your stakeholders. So having these tools in your product marketing toolbox, really there's 3 big outcomes and advantages from doing that. The first is, again, it provides you as a product marketer with the confidence that you've asked the right questions up front. You've challenged your stakeholders to align and stay aligned on the most critical information. It makes product marketing a more strategic partner to the business. Product marketing is strategic. This reinforces that, because you're taking a structured and a very top-down approach. And then ultimately your presentation creation process will avoid some of the missteps and redos that we commonly see, keeping the costs down and the quality up. And again, as product marketing leaders out there, it's a great way to have a consistent, repeatable way to help your teams build decks, at least follow the process of building a deck and making sure that they're heading in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Molly for Q&A. And thank you all for listening today.
Thank you so much, both Steve and Steve. That was so helpful. We've got coming up right into 10 minutes here for the Q&A, so I am going to skip this last poll, but just want to call out with these polls, everyone, these were built in PowerPoint. Steve Sheets, message him if you have any questions. You can build these polls in PowerPoint, and as you can see, it's kind of a Google form integration. So we really love to show off everything that PowerPoint can do. And if you don't follow us on YouTube, Steve is putting out PowerPoint tutorials almost on a weekly basis now. So any technical questions get answered over there.
I've actually got how I made those and some troubleshooting, because they are finicky. It's going to be kind of a longer tutorial, but I'll do times and kind of what's where in the video. I can have that on LinkedIn later today for anybody who wants to know how to do it.
Yeah, awesome. So cool. All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and use these last 9-10 minutes to get through a few questions. I know we had one already come in when I believe you had the Mind Tickle slide up earlier, Steve. So he's asking, how many hours would you say went into developing and creating just that single slide? And those specific slides, right? Even with the Miley one, right? There's so much that you're capturing. So how much goes into that?
It really depends. If that slide 0 stuff is nailed down first, we really can get to that very quickly. And we know that those are really important slides. So we're probably going to do a few different options, but they're all going to be good, because we're going to know like what's important and why it matters, and we're going to know what to highlight, and we're going to know how to show it. And we'll probably have more than one designer take a crack at it, and we can fire it out pretty quickly. Where it gets tricky is usually with those slides that are like really high importance. There's usually some back and forth on content. And I think that Mind Tickle slide, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I think we made like 5 different versions of it before we were finally like, all right, this is the one. But some of that came from content changes as well. So that's where the slide 0 really pays off. Do the work early and it will pay off later.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, Earl, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's an example of the words on that Mind Tickle slide were very, very specific, and I think by figuring those out up front, I think Steve then can do the creative side pretty well. I'm not going to say quickly, but with less worrying about the words themselves. So I agree that really thinking through the words is important. Words are important and simplicity is key.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have one, just while we're waiting for the lag to kind of catch up and get another comment thrown in here. I know that people say this all the time, like we hear this from clients, right? Where it's like, this is a great framework, but like we don't have time to do this, right? Like we don't have time. We were given this presentation assignment, like it needed to be done yesterday. So what would you say to the folks that are always kind of cramming and how they can implement slide zero and what it could do for them ultimately with their time management?
Yeah, no, believe me, we're all time strapped. Product marketers live in a time void. We're always doing things at the last minute, unfortunately. Doesn't mean you can't use the framework. And again, the framework can be used quickly or, as a full-blown process. I encourage you, even if you feel like you're short on time, work through the questions yourself. Still go through the framework, because it will actually save you time down the track. By answering those questions, you'll actually speed up the building of the presentation slides, guaranteed. So take the time. You don't need to spend a week building the framework out. Spend a couple of hours thinking through the questions and make sure they're really crisp, because it will actually save you time if you follow that in some form. So I encourage you to do that. But I also understand the time constraints we all have, but this actually will help a little bit in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff is asking if someone doesn't know their who, and I think this question could be applied to any of the who, why, what, and how within slide zero. If someone doesn't know that very well yet, maybe their company isn't super familiar with their why, or new hires, or someone who really isn't familiar with their audience, how do they test for that? And then how do they implement that into the slide zero framework?
Yeah, I mean, remember, the framework is a framework of questions. The framework isn't going to give you the answer, but as product marketers, we have to ask the questions and find the people that have the answers to those questions. So I think start with the stakeholder. Someone's come to you and asked you for a presentation to be built, and challenge that person on the who, the why, the what, and the how. That's who you should be working with. If they don't know, that's a different set of problems, right? Maybe together you need to figure it out. But just remember, the framework isn't going to give you the answers. It will help. It will give you the questions to make sure that those questions are answered in a way that can help build the deck. So it will. We won't always have the answers, but I think as product marketers, we're responsible for figuring them out.
Absolutely. And I love this question. Tamara is asking, what are some emerging trends you see in presentation design? I think you both might have interesting perspectives on this.
I'll pitch that over to Steve, since he's the expert.
Yeah, I guess I talked about this some. It's with the screen sharing that's usually happening with these. We're just able to get away with so much more, and fit more into less space, and it's just giving us more room to experiment and just kind of get weird. So things are getting pretty wild. Some of the design trends that are happening right now, just some of the things with color and fonts and even legibility. People are really pushing the boundaries in design right now. And like I said, presentation design is catching up to print. I don't think they'll ever be in the same place, because at the end of the day, a presentation needs to convey information quickly, where print design is more entertainment focused. So they can make things a little harder to read and a little bit crazier, and that's okay. It's a safe space for that. But the gap is closing, and even like what previously would have been like, oh man, very corporate, like kind of tight presentation, we're able to push boundaries so much more. So it's a lot of fun.
I love being a part of it. It's really fun to watch everything change. All right, I think we got time for one more, and then we can go ahead and wrap. But how would someone, convince their boss, if they have a current framework, their boss or team, to adapt this framework, right? What's kind of some proof to get that transition to happen?
Yeah, I mean, probably as I said, a lot of this is not new. This isn't rocket science. I think all product marketers know about these things. and do some already today. I think what this does is bring it together. So I would guess that if you have a framework in place, it probably is pretty close to this or has a piece of it. Take this framework and merge them, adapt it to what you already do today. And bringing those together will actually be perfect for your business. I think every business is different. And this is, this can be adapted to whatever works for you. So I encourage that process is how can I customize this to really make it work for my business and the industry that I sell into, which is the other important piece, right? Has its nuances. So I encourage you to kind of
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. And I know I said that was the last one, but Beth McNamara asked best resources or books for developing story chops. And I'm going to hijack this one as the co-host of Presentation Thinking and plug a few things for developing narrative strategy. Beth, I would definitely recommend looking up Andy Raskin, Tamsin Webster, and Nancy Duarte as three amazing, really narrative focused with finding your core messaging. And then especially with Nancy Duarte's resources on duarte.com, translating those to design. Andy Raskin has a framework all about finding the promised land. Like, what does your product or service get people to the promised land? And this slide is up here as Mikey, co-founder or founder of GhostRanch Communications, and I host the Presentation Thinking podcast. We've talked to Tamsin Webster, we've talked about these people, and we've talked about a lot of these frameworks. So go ahead and dig in there as well if you're interested. If you enjoyed listening to this Lunch and Learn, we have new episodes come out every Thursday. So tune in wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, just to finally wrap here, if you are in need of presentation elevation, there is a team for that. So don't hesitate to reach out at GhostRanch.com, fill in a contact form, or simply email us at presentations@GhostRanch.com. And we want to say thanks for hanging out. If you're still listening, I know people got to drop off, but while it's awesome to be virtual, we do have physical copies, as you saw, of the pitch planner. So if you go to LinkedIn, tag GhostRanch Communications and hashtag slide0, we'll get in touch with you and ship you a pitch planner directly. So go out, share on LinkedIn with either this post or something tagging GhostRanch Communications on LinkedIn, hashtag slide0, and we'd love to hear from you. So stay tuned. Our next Lunch and Learn will probably be at the end of January next year. And I hope everyone has an amazing wrapping up the Q4 season. Steve, thank you so much for your time and really appreciate everyone who hung out.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, Steve.
All right, we'll go ahead and end the stream here. Thanks, everyone.